What is up, guys? Belamy Prime here once again, and today we're going to be doing a follow-up to our previous video, which was basically archer builds that you guys can consider when playing ArcheAge if you're thinking about playing an archer. And we're going to be doing an updated version of our Mage build guide video, or Mage build concepts, theory crafting, whatever it is you want to call it. We're going to be talking about some Mage builds today, some that are updated versions of our previous builds that we released a little over a year ago before ArcheAge Unchained. So updated versions of those, or new and improved builds with new gear that have been released since then. Some of these builds are ones that I've played personally on my account, and other ones are just ones that I have played similar iterations of in the past on older accounts, and other ones are more theory crafted, but I can stand by them pretty confidently. So before we get into it, I have basically 5 builds here. You can see 7 at the top of my screen if I haven't edited out the tabs at the top, but I've got essentially 5 different builds that have differing bits of armor and slightly different setups. But before we get into it, I want to preface a few things, because most of these builds are, like all my other videos, very primarily focused on the armor setups, because for the most part you can interchange the armor setups and your weapon setups. So as far as mages go, there are 3, technically 4, but 3 main options in terms of the weapons and the damage type you choose to scale, and those basically go between dual wield and two-hand, and then either stacking critical damage as your main damage type, or defense penetration, or in this case magic defense penetration as your main damage type. So you can interchange those in whatever way you want. So you can play dual wield defense pen, dual wield crit, or you can play two-hand crit, two-hand defense pen. And then you can also, depending on whether you're playing two-hander or not, you can play attack speed variant, or you can play cast time variant. Now, on ArcheAge Unchained, I played a cast time crit variant of a staff build. In my opinion, in the current meta, especially if you're on ArcheAge Unchained and the balance patch is already live, defense penetration or magic defense penetration definitely seems to be the way to go in terms of dealing out more damage, especially if you're in the late game, 15k gear score plus players all around the place. That definitely seems to be the way to go. Crit definitely seems to fall off a little bit, especially because unlike archers and things like that, mages can't push right up to the expanded crit level cap, which is 350%. So that's unfortunate, but defense pen is probably, they're very similar in terms of damage. However, defense penetration or magic defense penetration seems to be more consistent, because for the most part, you're rolling magic defense penetration and then magic crit rate on all of your weapons and things like that. So on average, not on average, in every single case, if you're playing a defense penetration build, you have way more crit rate, so your damage is way more consistent. It's just that it's a little bit differing depending on who you're hitting, but that's fine. Defense penetration, very solid. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit weaker in PvE, but who's really here for those reasons? So yeah, that's magic pen versus crit, in my opinion. Crit damage is way better early game, so if you're starting on a fresh start server and watching this video, crit damage is definitely the way to go early, and then you can just transition into defense pen build later. Definitely go crit early. It's way better early when no one has any resilience, and you'll just delete people, whereas defense pen is kind of shitty early. But if you're a late game player and you're looking at dealing with like maybe 10k gear score players and plus, magic defense pen starts to pick up where crit damage starts to fall off. But you really won't suffer any way whatsoever if you pick whatever build. They're still both great as long as you build them correctly. Okay, the other thing is, with all of these builds today, most of which you can interchange all of the damage types, so you can play defense pen, magic crit damage, you can play dual, you can play two-hand, you can play attack speed, you can play cast time. However, there are some builds that are more geared towards certain setups, so I'll explain that when we get to it. And the other thing is, too, a lot of the builds you can easily throw on a shield instead of an offhand. If it's a dual wield setup, you can easily throw a shield on, and, or if you're playing an actual character, you can have an offhand and a shield at the ready, depending on the situation you're playing. So that's an option as well. So if you're a shield kind of person, definitely throw a shield on if you really want to have a shield on your build. And the other thing is, all of my builds today are an attempt at being as humble as possible. I'm not going to just fill my entire setup with just eternal gear, with the exception of the costumes and weapons. I hate there's nothing I hate more than when someone shows me a build and it's literally just full Eternal in every single slot, and I'm just like, come on, man, be realistic. Sure, it looks great, but try and be a little bit realistic with the gear that you're getting, because most often than not, things are going to go wrong with your gear. It's going to take you a lot of time to get to that fucking Eternal. So try and put something that's got a little bit more realistic for the near future. So I like to just do all kind of mythic setups and nothing too crazy and try and be realistic. And then I keep in the back of my mind, right, yep, I'm doing basically extremely realistic builds in some of the cases. They're a bit more unrealistic, but try to do realistic builds and then just know in the back of my head, right, there's a lot of upgrades that can still happen here, so I can just keep this build, and then as I get more Eternals, it's just going to get even better. So there's that. And the last thing you need to consider when looking over this video is that if you're in ArcheAge Unchained, the balance patch is live. That means that there are diminishing returns on your base stats, so intelligence in this case, which means that you want to take a lot of intelligence off of these builds and put it into stamina. So basically all you want to do is just take some of the rolls, like some intelligence rolls, and then just change them into stamina rolls and get a bit more stamina heavy, because there are some diminishing returns coming. So if you're on Southeast Asia, things like that, playing the fresh start there maybe, you don't have to really worry about the balance patch yet. I'm not sure if it comes out when Garden comes out for us, or if it's a little bit further down the track. But essentially, when that happens, you want to drop a lot of your intelligence in favor of stamina, because you're not gonna be able to stack full intelligence anymore. You really want to have probably no more than 1,500 int. I'll probably go for like 1,350, and then the rest stamina. Just because if you stack it too high, you start to get diminishing returns, and you just get a lot more value out of having the stamina instead. So if you're on ArcheAge Unchained, that should be the case for you. Less intelligence, more stamina on all of your builds, just because the diminishing returns are live, and I don't think you're going to get too much value out of stacking your intelligence anywhere near 2,000, let alone over it. So that's the things I wanted to preface the video with. The first 3 builds that I have here on the screen are basically the different weapon setups. So our first one here is a dual wield magic defense pen setup. So we have all the standard stuff. The reason why defense pen's so good is because on your synthesis effects you roll int magic defense pen magic crit rate, which is great. And then this build is an attack speed variant more geared towards malediction. So I have I still have frigid trash cast time gems in here because I haven't changed that, but if you're a malediction focus mage, you definitely would change these to serpent glare duration gems. And then on your gloves, because you're a defense penetration build, you don't need magic critical damage, you switch out that Lunafrost for a magic crit rate for another 2%, and then obviously you're not going to have things like magic crit damage on your costume and on your cloak. You're going to go in favor of the magic pen and some other stats. So really, really good, this kind of setup in terms of the weapons and the offensive stats. You're going to end up with your base magic critical damage, so you're still getting that 50% bonus. Your critical rate is almost 92%, which is fantastic. And it's just really good. Defense penetration, almost 12k, very, very solid. The second setup is a staff magic defense penetration variant, still on attack speed. So playing a staff, you can still do basically the same thing. You'll have slightly less attack speed because you won't have the dual wield buff, but you will have access to things like the free magic skill damage, a little bit of cast time for quality of life, even though you're in attack speed build. And you get the shield defense penetration rate. So if you're attacking someone with a magic shield, you'll most of the time ignore half of that shield. So it's a solid little chunk of magic defense pen as well. Obviously, your magic defense penetration isn't as high because you don't have as many raw stats that you get from the 2 dual wield weapons. But the flat magic attack and the skill damage off the 2-hand weapon definitely makes up for that little bit of lost magic defense penetration. So still very solid. And then the third one is essentially a magic defense penetration build with a cast time setup. So this is more geared towards playing things like Spellsinger, where you're going to be trying to one-shot people with arc lightnings and just dish out a ton of fireball damage and play that kind of build. This is definitely not... Any cast time build doesn't really mesh too well with a malediction setup. Whereas if you're playing an attack speed variant of any of these builds, you can pretty much play any spec of mage in the game. You're not limited to just Spellsinger kind of stuff, like sorcery only mage. You can play malediction, sorcery, a combo of both. You can obviously still do that with a staff and things like that, but with the cast time setup. But your things like crashing waves and your mana stars and all of the attack speed reliant skills are going to feel very clunky without that attack speed in your back pocket. So proceed with caution if that's the route you like to take. If you prefer Malediction Mage over Sorcery Mage, basically don't even consider a cast time build. You can still cast Arc Lightning without the cast time. It's just going to take you a while. It's not going to be as OP because you can't stack as many debuffs. But enough rambling. This is essentially the first build we're going to cover. This one is the one that I played on ArcheAge Unchained. I recently stopped playing over there. I had an Aeronor staff instead of a Hiram, but that's neither here nor there. That's personal preference. That's the same deal with all of the builds today. If you want, you can replace your main hand weapon with an Aeronor. That's better. That's perfectly fine. And yeah, so going to go through, suss some of these. This is the one that I played on ArcheAge Unchained. I played 5 pieces of cloth. So cloth, so we got Hiram hood, Hiram shirt, Hiram pants, Hiram shoes, and Hiram gloves. And then we took Shadow Warrior's Shadows and Cruel Glory Sash, which are 2 pretty dated pieces. But in my opinion, Shadow Warrior Shadows, I've talked about this before, is one of the best pieces in the game. It gives you a nice solid bit of toughness, some int, and yeah, it's going to give you a ton. It's just, the combo effect is insane, which is basically invulnerability proc once you go under 20% HP. It's actually 15%. ArcheAge Calculator is incorrect. It's incredibly consistent, and it's just a really good proc. It'll save you very often against many different types of damages, and just it's an amazing piece. If you're running any cloth build, whether you're a tank, a healer, a mage, anything in cloth, you should have Shadow Warrior Shadows in your build. Unless you're like 7 out of 7 library or something, you should have this, because it is an insanely good piece, even if it's only fucking divine. It's amazing. And then the other off piece we have is the Cruel Glory Sash. It's not listed correctly here on the ArcheAge Calculator. It says additional effects, and it's got toughness ×2. It's actually toughness. There's only one of those toughness rolls, and then it's got a essentially telekinesis skill, which you will have seen me use in a lot of my PvP videos. It's insanely good for 1 vs 1, and it's really good for raid vs raid as well, because it's essentially a 2-second skill that you channel that locks a person down, does a solid bit of damage, and it's just incredibly useful and fun to use, and I love using it. And obviously it gives a bit of toughness as well, which is really good. So you end up with this build, you end up with a very beefy amount of toughness, even at Mythic. Like, so if you get Eternal, you're sitting at 5k toughness, which is well above the soft cap, and really, really good for a build that doesn't have any hero gems in its cap. So that's insane. And yeah, this build was extremely fun to play. I found that I was obviously very squishy against melees and archers, which is on this build here on ArcheAge Calc, I took melee damage reduction on all my hero pieces. When I was actually in game, I took range damage reduction on all of them, including on my undergarments, which I do have here, because I found that I was pretty capable at kiting melees. If I got caught by a melee despite having the damage reduction, it didn't do anything, because melees just hit you in cloth so hard. Whereas archers, it seemed to be a lot more valuable to have the range damage reduction, because archers, you know, if an archer tabs to you and you don't have any reduction against them, they're just going to kill you from ages out, and there's nothing you can do about it, because they outrange you, they outspeed you, whereas a melee you can kite. So that's your defense against a melee. So yeah, range damage reduction was my choice when I'm in cloth. It's really down to personal preference. You can have a mixture of both, melee or ranged. It's really up to you. And the one thing I will say is this: when you go Hiram, obviously resilience is the must-have role. So you go main stat resilience, and then the damage reduction type is up to you. Never go max HP. Max HP is trash. Do not take max HP. A lot of people's thought process is, why would I limit myself to just damage reduction against one specific damage type, like ranged, when I could have max HP, which gives me a buffer against every damage type? Not worth it. The max HP is too low. If the rolls were a lot higher, sure, but the max HP is way too low for how valuable received damage reduction is, even against one damage type. So there's that. Next build today is another cloth build. It's our last cloth build. Actually, no, it's not. It's our second cloth build. We got one more after this. And this one is essentially 5 out of 5 library, focusing on defense penetration, taking advantage of the Lunafrost that you can get on the magic set. So we get the Arrogance, which gives us, on 3 pieces, it'll give magic crit rate plus 5%, and then on 5 pieces, magic defense penetration 600 plus 600. So really, really suitable to a magic defense stacking build. Magic defense penetration stacking build, sorry. So you can see here, we have 12,385 magic defense penetration, which is fantastic. On a magic defense pen build, that's pretty much penetrating all magic resist that most leather players will have. and a decent chunk of a cloth wearers as well. And depending on how tanky they are as a plate wearer with a magic shield, potentially a big chunk of theirs as well. It's a very consistent damage, and you also get the 3 and 5 set bonuses from the Discord shirt, which is a little bit of, it's pretty insignificant, 11.8 magic attack. I don't even know who the fuck thought that was a good idea. It's rubbish. But the 5 set bonus is good, which is basically giving you 5% crit rate. So you can see with a defense pen build, your magic crit rate is already super solid. It's 93.4 here, so you're basically at 100% when this is fully stacked up. Obviously, resilience plays a little part there, but anywhere over 85% critical rate, you're sitting pretty. And just the more you get over that, the better and more consistent your damage is going to feel. So that's great. And yeah, this is just a pretty solid, straightforward build. You take 5 pieces of library. I elect to take the Cruel Glory Sash and the Shadow Warrior's Shadows as my 2 off pieces. You can take whatever you want. A lot of other people generally elect to take a Hiram shirt and a Hiram pants, because those are the more defensive ones. You get the most stats out of them, i.e. you get the resilience and the received damage reduction rolls on the synthesis effects on both of them, and you obviously get the Lunar Frost. So the chest piece is going to give you the Warrior's Lunar Frost, the 3% damage reduction against all damage types, and then the the pants in cloth are going to give you the 375 toughness, how much it is. So that's really good as well. If you want the more defensive option, take a Hiram shirt and a Hiram pants, and then replace these two with the Disciples pieces. And if you want the more offensive type, or the specialized type, you take the 2 off pieces here that I like to use. But you can really take any 2 pieces depending on what you want to do and what frosts you prefer. If you're curious about 7 out of 7 library, it doesn't really fancy me in terms of a set that's really viable. The 7 set bonus on paper sounds really, really good. But if you're playing a defense penetration build already, it doesn't really make sense. If you're playing a crit build, sure, I can see your argument for it. But the proc itself has a chance to ignore target's full magic defense on a 20-second cooldown is extremely inconsistent. And the reason why that is because any damage over time effects that you apply to an enemy can waste that proc. So the way it works is, if I was to hit you with a fireball, it would proc, and then basically it would say the next attack, as far as the way it calculates, the next attack that you do, no matter what it is, if it's an arc lightning, if it's anything, is going to have plus 100,000 magic defense penetration. So when it procs, you'll see your magic defense penetration in your character sheet go up by 100,000, which is obviously anyone and everyone's full magic defense, and then you hit them with that one skill, and it ignores their defense, and then it goes away. The problem with it is if you hit someone with a fireball or an arc lightning or a God's Whip, and it applies any kind of dot, whether that's a fire dot or an electricity one, it's going to, those procs that happen every second, so the damage over time effects, so the lightning just hitting for no damage every second, can waste that proc. So more often than not, your procs get wasted on damage over time effects, and obviously that's just useless. When it does happen, it is amazing, I'll admit. Like, if you fireball arc someone with that proc up on a crit build, you'll probably one-shot them no matter who they are. However, it can get wasted very easily on damage over time effects if you don't get lucky and you're not good at fishing for procs. So 7 out of 7 library is great, but inconsistent in my opinion. So proceed with caution if that's the build you elect to go with. But it is solid if you get good at kind of fishing for the proc. The next build today is the last cloth one. This is kind of the big dick build of the bunch. This is a crit only based build because we're building the Dread Necromancer's Hood, which is the upgraded version of the Anthelon set piece. And this piece gives all critical damage plus 12.6%. So basically what this piece allows us to do as a mage is to push pretty much up to the magic critical damage cap, which currently fast on Southeast Asia is 300%. It's 405 here on ArcheAge Calc, but that's because they include the base 100% that you have. So basically you take 100 off this, we're sitting at 305, which is just over the cap. Obviously, if you're playing with Malediction and then Rhythm stacks, you can have a bit more crit damage. But if you're playing any of those builds, for example, you can basically hit the expanded cap, which is the 350%, or in this case, it would be 450. So if you were, what am I doing? Skills. if you were playing with, so this is a Spellsinger setup, if you had your full rhythm stacks with your Deadly Refrain, and then you were also using, let's drop just Shadowplay just for Malediction, just to show you guys, and then you picked up the passive in Malediction that gives you magic critical damage 12%, that helps you push very close to the crit damage cap, which makes crit damage a lot more viable and a lot stronger than what it is compared to magic defense penetration without this kind of piece. So that's fantastic. It's really, really good. And just for the sake of it, we picked up the 2 extra pieces of the Dread Necromancer's set because we want the 3 set bonus, which is going to give us swim speed. So it's really good underwater. You don't have to wear swim fins and you still get the swim speed. And also they're just solid pieces. So the gloves will give you the same usual synthesis effects, but it gives you crit rate plus 5.4%. And then the pants will give you a flat 5% increased magic attack, which is really great. Especially if you play a staff variant of this build, it would give you a lot of damage for sure. However, obviously these pieces are going to be extremely expensive for you to acquire, so don't go into ArcheAge thinking you're going to get these extremely easily. Really, to make this setup work with the crit damage, you really only need the hood. You don't even need it per se, but once you get the hood, it will be a really good upgrade. That's the priority. The other 2 are just kind of quality of life. The next priority would be the pants because it's flat attack, especially if you're on a staff setup. And then the gloves you don't really need. They give crit rate, which is nice, but we're really only taking them for the 3 set effect. They're not necessarily by any means. Really, if you can get the hood, that's amazing. You get a nice chunk of crit damage. But honestly, you don't really need it. Otherwise, it's just my first build with cloth. And like I said, you can take any of these builds with any of the weapon setups, but obviously this one is geared more towards crit damage because otherwise this hood would be useless. And next one is a leather setup. Now this one is basically full Hiram leather, except there's one slight difference. So every single piece except for the breeches are Hiram leather, and this is just your standard kind of leather magic defense penetration setup that you'll see most everywhere in ArcheAge at the moment. This is kind of the cookie cutter, what people go to because it's extremely consistent, very solid, and it's just a great build overall because you can play pretty much every class in the game, and it'll do a lot of damage no matter what you do. So it's a defense pen variant, obviously. Normally, you can just go 7 out of 7 Hiram, and then if you can get your hands on Timesia's Merciless Resolve, which is the breaches from Charybdis, you have to get your hands on some hides and craft this bad boy up. And if you can get your hands on this, it's just an extra bit of flat magic defense penetration, almost 700, which just makes the build much, much better. And leather compared to cloth is going to give you a little bit more skill damage. So you can see it gives 12.2% here, whereas a cloth variant is going to give you 10.5. And obviously this will be more at Eternal as well, so a little bit more skill damage here. The obvious downside to leather is that you're a lot more weak to magic, so I like to take magic damage reduction on all my leather pieces, because for the most part, like I said earlier in the video, pretty confident in my ability to kite melee, so I don't take melee damage reduction. And since you're in leather, you're less susceptible to archers than what you were in cloth, you know, getting 2-shot previously. So yeah, if you're in leather, I like to take magic damage reduction, but it's really personal preference. You can take whatever you want. It just depends on what you're least comfortable against. So if you don't like coming up against mages, take the magic damage reduction. If you don't like archers, etc., etc. So yeah, really solid build. If you can get your hands on some Temesia pieces, they're kind of insane for mages specifically. They're just ridiculous. The magic damage, magic defense penetration is insane. And that kind of leads me into my next build, which is the build that I was going to get my hands on in ArcheAge Unchained. I was re-rolling my mage to pick up these pieces before I quit playing. I had made the transition to full leather. I had my hands on an Aeronor staff. And I was going to play this build ideally, and the chase item that I was going after was the Temesia's Merciless Thoughts, which is the Charybdis cap, and it gives 5.4% skill damage. Now, the build that I was playing is slightly different to what I've got here, but it was a cast time variant on crit. I was going to change it over to magic defense penetration. But essentially, what this allows you to do with the Temesia's Thoughts is get a lot of skill damage, and stacking skill damage is our priority on this build. You can see that our magic skill damage is 137.7%, so it's in-game that would look like 37.7%. which is insane. Just on a mythic set, it'd be closer to 40% if you were full Eternal. And there are even some other things you could min-max to get even more of it, such as your Soul Liberator could be higher, and things like that. So it's a really just insane build. The numbers when I was testing this in our damage calc spreadsheet were off the charts for a staff mage running defense penetration. That it was out damaging full Aeronor cloth sets, which is just insane to me. Well, just full Aeronor sets in general in terms of the skill damage and the stats. And it was mostly due to the Timesius Thoughts giving the 5.4% skill damage, which is just ridiculous. It's an insane amount of skill damage, especially on a Spellsinger or a sorcery-based mage. The amount that scales your arc lightning damage was just ridiculous. So it came out really insane. And then really your only prio is getting the cap for this. You really don't need 3 pieces, but for the sake of it, I said fuck it. Why not get the extra pieces if you want to aim for the 3-set bonus? You can get the chest piece, which is the next best prio is obviously the Merciless Resolve we talked about earlier, which is the defense penetration. If you're running a crit build, obviously this isn't much of a priority, so you would go for the chest piece, which just gives 7.2% flat evasion, which is also kind of ridiculous. That's a lot of evasion. So you can see on this build, we're looking at 31% evasion, which is kind of crazy as a mage, without any passives. And do we even have... I'm missing a lot of evasion. If I wanted to stack evasion, you could get closer to 50% evasion on this kind of a build. So, very insane build. Crazy damage, especially with the staff variant. You're missing a little bit of skill damage here. If you have a staff, you obviously get the 5% extra skill damage, which takes you closer to 40%, and you're looking at crazy amounts of arc lightning damage at that point, against, probably giving you the ability to one-shot almost any player in the game if you hit a crit. So I would have loved to have tested this, but at the moment, as we all know, if you've seen my previous video, I have switched over to Southeast Asia to get myself some better ping, because I was playing on NA from Australia, so I was playing on with like 220 something ping. So yeah, I'm having a nice time over there playing Archer now, so look forward to seeing videos of that if you're interested in seeing some Archer gameplay. But yeah, these are my top 5 builds at the moment that I would consider playing for Mage. It's in an ideal world, the Timesius Merciless Thoughts in the leather setup is probably the best build in my opinion. So if you want to take leather and then aim for that in the end game, great. If you just want to aim for some resolve piece with the defense penetration, that's great. If you prefer the cloth variant, you can aim for the necromancer setup. Or if you want to go to the library route, that's great as well. 7 out of 7, 5 out of 5. It really comes down to personal preference. And then we have the classic cloth build, which basically, if you want to play a cloth build like this, you can play this build, and then just later on when you get the necromancer's pieces, start switching them out. So this basically is the same build. These two here, it's just switching out the necromancer's pieces if you're the crit variant and you want to take the critical damage. So pretty crazy builds. I stand by every single one of these. I know for a fact that they'll all do crazy amounts of damage and be very solid. You can obviously chop and change little bits and pieces as you wish to match your personal preferences, which is what most people should do. And yeah, if I had to say out of all these builds, the strongest one by far is going to be the last one here, the leather set with the Charybdis pieces, specifically the cap, and on a sorcery-based build. So obviously still be fine with Malediction, but if you want to play this build, the skill damage stacking is definitely more suited to sorcery play with their massive flat damage hitting spells. So very, very solid. You'll basically one-shot anyone with an Arc Lightning with this kind of a setup, especially if you have a staff and a little bit of cast time thrown in there, but you can really do it in any way whatsoever. So those are our 5 main builds today, guys. I'm going to leave all 7 of these in the description, but the first 3 they're all the exact same build, they're just with the different weapon variants, so you can see how you want to change certain things like Lunafrost's costume stats in terms of what kind of weapon style you want to go. So I'm going to link them in that kind of way. So first one will be dual wield setup with attack speed, and then we'll have a staff setup with attack speed, and then we'll have a staff setup with cast time. And then keeping in mind that any of those changes you can make into crit damage and play whatever build you want. So yeah, there you go, guys. There's going to be my builds for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, like, comment, and subscribe. If you have any questions about the specifics of any of the builds, feel free to hit me up in my Discord. The link will be in the description. I'm more than happy to help anyone when they get around to me. And yeah, if you have any questions about the build, like I said, feel free to hit me up. I'm having fun playing ArcheAge again. I'm still playing a little bit of PoE still as well. But yeah, let me know in the comments, guys, if you want to see tank builds next, or melee builds, or even healer builds. I'm happy to put any together. I've had a little bit in my Discord, people asking me in my DMs to make tank builds. So I will probably do that, but most likely after melees, simply because melees, archers, and mages, the three that I'm going to cover first, are most likely the ones people are going to be looking for and going to be the most popular. So call me a view whore, whatever you want. We're moving on. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers.